The poster asks the following question about duodenal switch surgery. What is the duodenal switch type of weight loss surgery? I am looking into the why, but I found that there are people at many websites that swear by the duodenal switch. What is it? The duodenal switch operation is one of three different types of weight loss surgery. Basically, there is the purely restrictive operation, like the lap band. There's restriction with rearrangement, gastric bypass, and then there are the class of malabsorption operations where the small bowel is shortened so that food passes through the small bowel more quickly and hastens weight loss. Now, in the case of the duodenal switch operation, there are really two parts. The first part is a narrowing of the stomach. The surgeon passes a tube down on the inner side of the stomach and removes the lateral 90%, removes most of the outside of the stomach. That leaves a short, narrow tube that runs down. That leaves a narrow tube that runs down the stomach and restricts the amount of food that the person can eat. The other effect of removing that lateral part of the stomach is it removes the cells that produce an appetite-stimulating hormone called ghrelin. When those cells have been removed, the appetite goes way down. So the sleeve part of the operation, the sleeve portion of the duodenal switch, restricts the amount of food that can be eaten and decreases the appetite. Then the second part is the small bowel rearrangement part of the operation. The bowel is cut across or transected, and the lower part is brought up to the duodenum, and the upper part is brought down to the lower part about 100 to 150 centimeters from the colon, so that instead of having about 18 feet of small bowel to absorb nutrients, there's effectively now about 2 to 3 feet of small bowel to do the job. Having the malabsorption component further restricts the amount of calories that go into your system, allows you to absorb less, and thus lose weight and maintain your weight loss. So the duodenal switch operation is a combination operation. The stomach is smaller, there's less of the appetite-stimulating hormone, and the small bowel length is decreased, so there's less absorption. The duodenal switch operation has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years, and there are a modest number of surgeons who do the operation very well and have had very good results with it. Now, going back a couple of steps, back in 1991, when the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, took a look at the different operations, the NIH panel felt that the purely restrictive operations, which are represented now by the lap band, and the restrictive rearrangement operations, which are represented by the gastric bypass, were safe and effective enough to be used on a regular basis. On the other hand, they felt that the malabsorption operations that were available at that time, and at that point they were doing something called a biliary pancreatic diversion, they felt that the BPD operation had so many side effects that the additional weight loss that patients achieved with it weren't worth all of the side effects. Now, as time has gone along, a lot of things have evolved. Rather than doing gastric stapling, we're now doing lap band. Rather than doing gastric bypass with an open operation, we're now doing it all laparoscopically. And the malabsorption operations have evolved so that the duodenal switch has replaced the older operation. So far, the general opinion amongst the bulk of the surgeons is that the lap band and the gastric bypass are satisfactory for weight loss, and there's still concern that there may be too many technical or metabolic complications with the duodenal switch to make it a mainstream operation. So far, the National Institutes of Health hasn't revisited it. The feeling has been that there's still insufficient evidence to recommend the duodenal switch. So at the present time, the duodenal switch is a viable operation. It's performed by a minority of bariatric surgeons, but many of them get good results with it. And so far, it hasn't been approved by the bulk of the insurance companies. So you might say it's promising, it's got a lot going for it, but it still hasn't yet received the mainstream recognition that the lap band and the gastric bypass have achieved.